Good afternoon, everyone. So we are very pleased to welcome you and to welcome Professor Devesh Vijay today for the 68th series on urban workshop. So Professor Devesh Vijay is Associate Professor in the Department of History at Zakir Hussain Delhi College, University of Delhi. He has been Fellow at the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, at the Institute of Economic Growth, and at the Indian Council of Social Sciences Research. He has written on underdevelopment, ideology, and cultural history. And his recent writings include Writing Politics, Left Discourse in Contemporary India, Dalit and Democracy, Notes from Two North Indian Communities. Presently, he is engaged in a comparative study on poverty in a slum and a village near Delhi. And his presentation today is entitled Poverty and Welfare, Trends Over a Quarter Century in Delhi's Periphery. So thank you very much, Professor Devesh Vijay, to be here today.
Thanks, Christine. I hope I'm audible enough. And thanks a lot to Professor Mukhopadhyay and CPR and CSH. I won't pronounce this full because CSH, it will expose my Indian French badly. But I'm extremely thankful, especially because I have followed these workshops and with a lot of interest. It is indeed an honor to present my research findings here and get your feedback, hopefully. I may point out, I'll try to bring up not just the findings from my limited field, which would have been a very safe, straight and narrow approach, but try and relate these findings to the macro data sets and speak about some of the divergences, which is where I am more likely to fall flat, and I look forward to that and to go back with some wounds and nurse them and come out fitter from the discussion that I get. As you will note from the title and the abstract, I'm focusing on two sites within Delhi's, or rather NCR, one village and one slum, which I first approached in 1988-89 for my MPhil dissertation, did some house-to-house survey and life sketches in these communities. And then with some additional funding from the fellowships that Christine just now mentioned, I had the opportunity to revisit and see what changes have happened. Now, apart from this long durée perspective, this theme may appear interesting, I hope, also because this is precisely the period when very important changes happened in the governance structure in India. Almost everything from Professor Rajni Kothari to Ritika Khera, and that activists and academics had been demanding, a lot was introduced on paper, especially the 73rd and 74th Amendment, the liberalization of the economy, the implementation of Mandal Report, the rights to information, education, food, right to food, enlargement of the right to land, forests. So many things were introduced. And what is their impact on the ground? Now, this is a very interesting question to probe, and it happens to be hotly debated and contested as to what is happening, what is their translation on the ground. In this light, there is tremendous need to look at some communities in the long term. Unfortunately, though we have long-term village studies, like especially Palanpur is very intensively studied in Moradabad district, some of the Slater villages which had been studied in early 19th century, they have been followed up lately by Gohan and others. Weisers had studied Karimpur in near Agra. This was later again revisited by Susan Wadley, but very few slum studies and very few comparing the micro with the macro picture. This is where I hope to bring in some new angles. And now let me first introduce the sites a little more. The village is called Dhantala. It is in Meerut district. This is a multi-caste village dominated by the Gurjar community, with Dalits forming about 20% of the population. The studded slum is called Aradhak Nagar. It is in East Delhi, right on the border between Delhi and Ghaziabad, next to the GT road. The population of the village when I went in 1988 was 2080. Today it is about 2700. This is just a growth by about 1/3. On the other hand, the slum has nearly quadrupled from 441 in 1988 to about 1700 now. I've got the full, these are the demographic charts by caste. In case there are further queries, I'll come back to them. Otherwise, since there are a number of themes I want to touch upon, I'll be rushing through some of these charts. Please ask me to go back if there is. But before that, let me talk about the growth of infrastructure in these two communities. In 1947, Dhantala had no school, no road, no electricity, but it had one electric tube well that was installed way back in 1930s, and it had, of course, brick wells and a couple of bicycles that came around 1940s. This is in 1950s. A number of things happened in the village. Primary school, the fertilizers were introduced in this decade, and of course big reforms at the central level: abolition of zamindari, introduction of land ceilings. But on the negative side, the Dalits' condition worsened, because the benefits of land ceilings and the abolition of zamindari went largely to the middle caste Gurjars, who were ex-tenants of the zamindar of Todi. There was one Yahya Khan who was a zamindar for a long time. With this abolition of zamindari, the Gurjars improved their power, but the Dalits relatively went down. It's only later on I'll show how their position improved a bit. In 1960s, of course, HYVs came. The villagers very fondly remember the Sonhera Chausat, the golden wheat that was introduced at that time, immediately tripled the yield rates. Tube wells followed, and the Pradhan for the first time got elected through secret ballot. Earlier they used to just have a meeting, and by raising their hands they had to say who will be the Pradhan. 1970s, power supply came into homes. I said electric tube well was already there among the fields, but now in 1970s, power supply for homes. First tractors were introduced, and of course during the emergency, coercive sterilization. 1980s, milk cooperatives, a very important development. I'll comment on this, how earnings from milk are more than from the field for many of the marginal farmers. And a very important thing happened in this village in 1982-84. All the landless got together and they gherawed the collectorate in Meerut, and some of the CPM comrades helped them, and they got the common land of the village distributed among the landless. 3 acres every landless got in 1984, because of largely a rivalry within the Gurjars between two Pradhans. So the new upcoming Pradhan promised them that you elect me and I'll get you this land, and that's how a division within the power elite got them this benefit. This was a very important development, and it's a test case. What does land reform or land distribution help solve the agrarian poverty? It does not. I'll come to this because of the division of land holdings over generations. 1990s, along with economic liberalization, what we sometimes ignore, 73rd Amendment of course happened, but also the pensions and the expansion of subsidized PDS system. This was a very important development in 1990s. 2000s, buses started touching the village, a number of personal vehicles, cell phones, satellite television. What is still missing in the village is one dispensary. There is no dispensary. There are some semi-qualified doctors, private. Above all, there is no regular power. In fact, the power supply has worsened. It was in 1988 also I had seen about 12 hours of power supply was there every day. Now this has come down to 8 hours. They claim that they have some degrees, but apparently, they are, but they are practicing mixopathy. They give all kinds of medicines. Obviously, they don't have proper degrees. Now, what about Aradhak Nagar? This slum started cropping up in late 1960s as a cluster of huts of migrants coming in response to the demand for labor in the Jhilmil industrial area, which was coming up at that time, and some middle class colonies like Vivek Vihar, Suryanagar, they were all coming up around this time, and these huts started coming up. Now, in 1970s, the street lights were installed, in 1980s, street lights were installed, some hand pumps in the streets, not inside homes. And this was largely due to the intervention of the area MP, HKL Bhagat, who was 3 times MP from this area, and he was cultivating pradhans in various slums, and before each election there will be some extension of concession one by one, and this is how these facilities came up. In 1990s, there was a flooding in the slum, and when VP Singh was Prime Minister, he got the slum dwellers a token issued, and they were able to show that and build pakka houses instead of jhuggis. This was a very important development for them. Police did not stop them from building pakka houses. And then in 2000, Sulabh Shauchalaya was built up, Delhi Metro came just next door to this slum, a community center was built up with the help of the local councillor, there is a half-finished park, and these welfare schemes like midday meals in schools and pensions, etc., they perform a little better in the slum than the village that I have studied. 2010, electric pump was installed for cleaning the drains. This was a very huge, there's a huge problem faced by the slum dwellers. And lately these new ration cards have been issued, the plastic cards, on which a much larger number of families are getting these subsidized food grain, 2 rupee wheat and 3 rupee rice now. Demographic trends I have already mentioned, so I'll jump these slides. Yeah, this I just want to, these are the official census figures for the village, which I got with the help of my assistant Vikas, is sitting here. He tracked actually with a lot of difficulty this data, and we tried to compare what is census saying with our own survey of, and this is very interesting. The census figures show a 25% decline in the village population between 2001 and 2011. These two charts are there. I'm sorry about this next chart, which is actually a camera shot, but it is showing a 25% decline. Now I spoke to the teachers who did the survey and posed this issue, because this village is obviously not declined. There's a small contraction from 2700 to 2600, we recounted that, and we asked the teachers who did the survey why this huge mistake. They admitted that they did not cover certain lanes, but what is more striking and interesting for me is the fact that apparently there is no capture of such errors at the monitoring level. It is understandable that in the heat in May and June, teachers may make some errors, but 25% contraction is not captured at a higher level in the census commission. That is slightly amazing. Occupations I want to just briefly mention, because this is not my theme today, although I've spent a lot of time in tracking what are the various kinds of works occupations dwellers follow. Uh, I'll just mention 2 points. One is this important contraction in the proportion of agriculturists in India. Lately, this is a historic turn in a way. For the first time, the proportion of agriculturists has come down below 50% in the country. Now, even this, I learned from my field experience, actually includes only 30% as cultivators, because 15% are women livestock rearers who are looking after the at home, but they are selling milk, so they are counted as workers. Those households which do not sell milk are not counted as workers at all. But those households which sell milk and their women, if they are tending to livestock, they are counted as workers by the census. Now they form about 15% of these agriculturists. Plus there are a large number of so-called farmers who are actually spending much more time in non-farm work. So the actual cultivators is much lower than this, even this figure of 50% or 49% now. The same is seen in my data too. Another thing which I wanted to point out is the large number of work categories which I detected. These are 70 odd work and workers and non-workers. This is in contrast to not only the NSS charts, occupation charts, but also intensive studies of villages like Palanpur, etc., which have a generally this 3x3 classification of workers: primary, secondary, tertiary, then self-employed, wage workers and casual earners. Beyond that, there are a lot of new important categories to note. I'll just highlight 2-3. One, from the perspective of the residents, whether you are in the formal sector or the informal sector is much more important than whether you are skilled or unskilled. In fact, the whole race is for entry into the formal sector. Even a grade 4 employee in formal sector is a much sought after position. As you may have heard very recently, for the post of PN in Uttar Pradesh, Lucknow Secretariat, 250 PhDs had applied. So it doesn't matter whether you are grade 4. So the general classification, by ignoring this formal and informal sector division, I think is missing out on something very important. From the perspective of the villagers and the slum dwellers, this is the real boundary to be crossed. Secondly, both these, even the slum and the village, have a small but very dynamic middle class, you may call, or bourgeoisie, which is not involved in manual work, but they are the type of people, petty professionals, as I said, semi-qualified doctors, tutors, some lawyers, and of course businessmen, multitaskers who are involved in renting out properties or act as middlemen. This is the bourgeoisie which needs to be also looked at, plus non-workers who are officially not seen as working because they may be involved in semi-legal or illegal work. Semi-legal, I mean prostitution, begging, which is not seen as legal work. Totally illegal work, manufacture of contrabands, liquor especially. So then there are some so-called non-workers who are playing a very active role. They are political activists who are not earning, so they are not counted as workers. But if we, from the anthropological perspective, I think it is really important to look at all these work categories, and that's how this huge chart you see. All these have been tracked in 88, 89 and again in 13, 14. I'll just mention, for example, the bourgeoisie, what I'm calling, has grown from 1% to 5%. This is a very important change in both these communities. Number of semi-qualified doctors and lawyers, etc., that has come up, and it has grown from 1 to 5%. Also, the category of employers we don't see in our NSS, and although NSS asks this question, but most of our employment charts don't mention. This is a very important category to my mind. People who give jobs to others, and this would include not only middle peasants, but also somebody who's running an auto workshop or next to the village, or a saloon, haircutting saloon, and employing one or two people. This is again some growths in 1990s we have seen in our data. Now I come to the question of the main question, poverty. See, we have had a huge debate in our country. In fact, Agnes Dayton and Revolian and others came out with this huge book by this title, The Great Indian Poverty Debate, between broadly left and liberal economists, whether poverty came down in 1990s after liberalization of the economy. I think by and large it is accepted now poverty did come down, and my data corroborates that. There is just no doubt that poverty and hunger have come down. I have got 4 or 5 types of evidence for this. One, I have done the income chart, of course. These are we did a household survey. We did not ask them how much they consume as NSS does, because that was very, very tedious. What we did was we had street-wise group discussions about what are the types of workers in each household, and we had a standard multiplier by the kind of salaries or a daily wage that those types of workers get, and we computed these household incomes, and about 14% would be BPL in both these communities in 2014, when the poverty line was at around 1000 rupees for rural and 1400 rupees for urban India by the Rangarajan committee criteria. So by that we found about 14%, which is lower than what the national data is saying. And here again I find the liberal economists are perhaps closer to the mark. People like S.S. Bhalla against Utsa Patnaik, etc., who have been arguing that there is underreporting of consumption in NSS surveys. It seems corroborated by my data also. But forget these tables; they are not very precise. As I said, they were largely they are a bit of a guesswork. We could not ask each household how much they exactly consume in a month. We found that very tedious and not very reliable either. In fact, I want to mention this, a methodological point. I found focus group discussions much more useful than personal interviews at the household level. What a person says in isolation is not that reliable as what is mentioned in a group, and people correct each other. And luckily in poor communities, people tend to know a lot about each other, and they also give more time to surveyors, fortunately. So I found focus group discussions extremely useful, and but other types of evidence to show that poverty has come down. This is the type of housing. The top photographs are from 1988. You will immediately see this clearly shows that living standards have improved. Similarly, we had a detailed survey in 89 and again in 2011 of various consumer durables in households. Caste wise, this data is there. For example, number of two-wheelers have jumped from 20 in the village to about 200 now. This is a huge jump. Similarly, television sets, even four-wheeler. There are 4 four-wheelers in the slum now, and there are 3 air conditioners in Aradhak Nagar already. Mostly in the families where people have grade 4 but public sector jobs, and 2 or 3 jobs in a family. So they are able to afford a car or an air conditioner, although they are not very keen to immediately move out. They can afford to move out, and they or some of them have properties outside the slum, mainly in unauthorized colonies. Another very important indicator of reduction in poverty and slight improvement in living standards is the rise in real wage. By now it is accepted at the macro level also that wage did rise faster than inflation since 1990s, especially after 2000s. And what is the reason for this rise in wage? This is historic. I've been tracking real wage from Mughal India. It is difficult to compare, but there is a very useful way of tracking wage in terms of wheat wage. How much wheat can a laborer purchase in a day's wage? And if you look at Aine Akbari data and convert it into rupee instead of Akbar's units, if you convert them, roughly, as Irfan Habib has also mentioned, about 2 to 3 kg was the wage in Mughal India. 2 to 3 kg wheat could be purchased in one day's wage. At the time of independence, it comes to 5 kg, 5 kg in this region, and today it is about 16-17 kg, because the wage is around 350 rupees in Delhi and 250 rupees in the village. When I had started my surveys, the wages were 20 rupees in the village and 25 rupees in the city. Now this is about 14-fold jump. The inflation has jumped by about 7 times. So real wage has doubled. And this is a historic shift. Never had wage risen so much in entire Indian history. In fact, Tirthankar Roy has done a long-term study of wages, and he shows hardly in the colonial era wage rose at all. Even till 1970s it was not happening despite all the planning and Garibi Hatao and everything. It is 1990s which give this push, and let's ask the question why. I think 2 things have happened. One is the construction boom, which came with the expansion of the middle class. All this Noida and Gurgaon and many other sub-cities to which migrants are flowing, reducing the number of laborers available in villages. In fact, middle farmers are commonly complaining that labor is not available. So they have to raise the wage. That's a big push. So that is how liberalization indirectly helped wage rise. Secondly, this food security has enabled a lot of Dalit women to withdraw from very demeaning farm work on others' fields. The moment a Dalit family can afford it, they first of all withdraw their women from laboring on others' fields because it can be demeaning. Now this has been helped by food security, the expansion of this PDS system, and especially 1 rupee per kg wheat and 2 or 3 rupees, it varies across states. This has helped many families too, and this is in fact reflected in census data also. You might be aware there were, in fact, economists are puzzled between 2004 and 9, and even in the 68th NSS survey round in 2011 shows a massive withdrawal of women workers. And this could be because of the right to food and Narega, and they could have helped here. So leaving aside, now concluding that by and large poverty has come down, but this is nothing to celebrate. We still have 30% BPL population. Even small countries like Thailand, Malaysia, they have below 10%, below 5% BPL population if we go by the $1.25 standard international criterion. So there's nothing to celebrate about this, but the left critique that liberalization will lead to immeasurization, which Jan Brahman had been saying, Utsav Patnaik had been saying, Republic of Hunger, you may recall, or Amit Bhaduri, his famous essay, Predatory Growth. This did not materialize. Liberalization did help, but my critique would be that this is not enough. We still, 30% BPL population is a huge amount of suffering. That should be the critique. Secondly, it should also be remembered that the improvement that happened on the poverty front is not just because of liberalization. This is also the decade of an expansion of the welfare net. And thirdly, people have contributed in 2 ways. Birth rate started decelerating more significantly from the 90s. And we must recognize this is a very, very neglected point, I think, in public policy in India. We have just given up on family planning. But family planning is very important, not just for family finances and for the burden on hospitals, etc., but for helping on the wage front. We are able to have dirt cheap labor, about $0.50 per hour versus $10 in USA. This is possible because we have a huge supply of cheap labor coming in, and family planning helped in a big way. Apart from the fourth point, that it is very important from the point of view of women's health. So family planning ought to be promoted, despite our PM talking about demographic dividend. But this is a very, very clear help. Yeah.
I couldn't understand the relationship. When you say, how could family planning, right? Because family planning would lead to decline in numbers.
Yeah, it reduces the dependency ratio within the family, so it helps family finance. Secondly, I'm saying indirectly, silently, it helps in raising the wage, because less number of poor workers are available. If birth rates come down, why can't I afford a domestic maid in just 1500 rupees, 3000 rupees? This is ridiculous and in fact obscene. It should not be possible. And this is because that so many families are having more children, and when I talk to these domestic helps, and they do realize, they do agree with my point that it would have been better had they had 2 children, but partly because of, I think, lack of awareness and domination of more than husband, mothers-in-law, these decisions are not taken in an optimal fashion by many women. Now, yeah, one point I wanted to completely concur with left economists like Utsa Patnaik, who have talked about the inflation rate, official inflation rate, understating actual inflation. For this, I find clear evidence in my field. The chart on the right shows official rates, WPI and CPI on the top. Just 68% CPI inflation from 2006 to 13. This is from the RBI website. I calculated the price rise of potatoes, tomato, everything, and the total at the bottom is 272 up to about % rise over the same period. So it is I think very, very probable that the official inflation rate is highly understated, and that would reduce the actual wage rise also. But as I said, whatever way we look at it, let's forget inflation and nominal wage, etc. Let's just look at wheat wage. Wheat wage has jumped, the amount of wheat that a laborer can purchase, from 5 kg a day in 1950s to 16-17 kgs today. A brief remark on the hunger puzzle. There has been intense debate at the macro level on the issue of despite falling poverty, hunger going up, because data clearly shows calorie intake has come down. Now, this is one of the main points in the book, The Republic of Hunger. I think this is very, very misleading, because calorie intake definitely has come down, precisely because now laborers and Dalits and the landless are able to afford vegetables, cooked vegetable, along with their food. In fact, when I used to go to this village, I was staying with the Dalit family, and in 1988 they would have chapati with chutney with some chili, and that was the general diet. Today it is very commonly cooked vegetable, little bit of pulses. So naturally, in the same appetite, your calorie intake will come down. And in fact, we did a short survey, not with the entire population. This was whoever was willing, about 239 people were respondents in Aradhak Nagar and 300 in Dhantala. And we asked have you had to go without food in last 1 year? Only 27 families in Aradhak Nagar, 54 families in Dhantala said that they could not eat for a whole day in the last 1 year. So that hunger picture is perhaps misleading, at least in this region, I would say. And some economists are saying overall this calorie intake is going down is actually a positive sign, because diet is getting more variegated. In my field also, the number of families, for example, who can afford eggs or fruits occasionally is 200 in Dhantala and 120 out of 239 in Aradhak Nagar. So the hunger picture is maybe not that bleak. Similarly, these are domestic expenditure of two of the poorest families that I could find in my field. Mahesh and Bimlesh on the left, and Devishara and Rajesh. These are the poorest ones. I charted out their expenses. Their per capita income monthly comes to around rupees 400 for Mahesh and 600 for Devisharan. They are both having ill members, ill adults who are not able to work. Plus, they are farm laborers. They are completely assetless. That is the reason for their poverty. But even in these poorest families, the availability of cereals is not far below that which is required. For example, in the poorest is Mahesh's family, it comes to about 10 kg per month per member. Now this is not far below what can be optimally consumed by a person in a month. You will read roughly about 300 grams, I'm assuming, for chapatis. This is another very poor. This is one point where I found mention of hunger. This is Noor Ali. He is a beggar. He begs in train. And he mentioned that earlier they used to stay in Gonda. And he, in his childhood recollections, have memories of going hungry. This is the only instance I found. And but today, the picture below is of his son. He is able to educate him. He is very proud that this boy is doing a computer course. So after shifting to Western UP, you clearly see some improvement. Now, this is a very important point I wanted to make. Poverty has come down, but acute suffering has grown on many other fronts. This is the central thesis of my presentation. And what are these other fronts? I call this collectively as privations. They are acute hardships or sufferings which have a material base. They are not like suffering can be, for lack of companion also. Somebody can suffer a lot. But I don't call that as privation, because that is not the area of public policy. Civil society has to look after those issues. But those which have a material basis and cause acute suffering, they ought to be a matter of public policy. And what are these areas? And some of them are, unfortunately, I think, highly neglected, not only in official policy, but our academic discourses also. There are 6 broad sets of these privations. One is the safety environment, then the health environment, then the communal and caste tensions, then the local power dynamics, and lastly the economic shocks, especially underemployment can be a source, and unemployment can be a source of huge hardship and suffering. And I pose this, and I pose this question, whether they have worsened over time. Now, there is a very popular perception on the ground that crime has grown. And by crime, I am not talking about domestic violence, etc. I am just focusing on heinous, organized crime, and especially that remains unregistered and unpunished. We have all heard this terrible news repeatedly in the last few years from Uttar Pradesh, the Badaun gang rapes, rape victims being hanged from trees. Recently, 2 rape victims were murdered before they could depose before the court in Saharanpur. And a journalist being burnt alive, and look at this Kafkaesque word in which his son is forced to claim on television that my father burnt himself. And on top of that, the leader of the ruling party says लड़कों से तो गलती हो जाती है. Boys sometimes go astray. Not only that, he is recorded threatening a DIG. Don't forget what my party cadres can do to you. Now these are being taken, I think, a little lightly, because these are coming from regional satraps rather than, the center. We all remember the Bhavri Devi case, or we get after the center immediately, or the Nirbhaya case recently. When it happens in the center, we are much more alert, we respond back. But look at the neglect we are showing to this immense suffering that whole region is going through. I have come across families in the field which have stopped sending girls to college because they have to go by a road to the Kharkhoda is the town where the college is, about 3-4 kilometers from the village. This is immense suffering. Is it getting the kind of response that it should from civil society? At least we are safe in New Delhi. We can talk about these issues. I can understand in a UP Kasba, even a journalist will not dare to. But so this is one aspect. The safety environment has worsened very clearly. But safety doesn't include just heinous crime. Something else is happening. The health environment. And by health environment, I don't just mean the public healthcare system and the lack of it. The dispensary is not there even in the village. More than that, water and air pollution. Now we have data on air pollution, for example. This available data. Now this is hurting health in a big way. And this is not a small matter. Not only water and air, but the food chain is getting contaminated. Now, my suggestion would be that we should have a district-wise monitoring of this data. And it should be published for voter alertness and also for civic response, which we are, to my mind, to my knowledge, we are not doing. This is very important data to be monitored, tracked, and compared across districts and states, instead of just focusing on hunger, which is not that bad as we are imagining. But these are the sources of acute suffering on the ground. I have seen maximum suffering when illness combines with poverty. And there is hardly any healthcare available. In fact, one of my biggest surprises and complaints against the constitution makers and the critics of the constitution also didn't point this out. We have the word health mentioned only once in the constitution. In directive principles, there is a single line for that state will try to provide health care and old age pension. And this is in 1951, when already the Beveridge report has come out in 1942. Already the health, it has been implemented in 1945 by the labor. Bismarck did it in the 1880s. It is not that this is not possible. These are sources of huge suffering on the ground. I have seen an old woman inching towards death in the absence of affordable health care. Even families stop looking after some time. So these are the privations I wanted to highlight. Apart from safety environment and the health environment, as I said, local power dynamics. Still, I think, especially, I'm sorry, Western anthropologists and Western social scientists, when they come to India, they are, I think, over hung up on caste. Craig Jeffrey included. It is not caste alone that is the power axis. The ruling party cadres, they are a huge terror in parts of India, especially in the region I am working in. And this is a new power axis. It may be more fluid. It's not as stable as the old caste order, but they are creating terror. As I mentioned some examples of journalists being burnt alive, of rape victims being murdered. You know, in the area where I am working, there is a Dr. Suman Tyagi in Meerut. She has just disappeared. She had a little tiff with the local MLA. No one knows where she is now. There is, you have heard of the Sarawa village, the girl. She retracted her statement on television about her gang rape. After that, nobody knows where that girl is. I sent my assistant to that village, and that family was in such anguish they just didn't want to talk about. So this party cadres and their terror on the ground, New Delhi needs to take better note of. On privations, I will make one more point. Why am I not using the word which Amartya Sen uses, deprivations? Against that, I have used the term privations for two reasons. One, this idea of deprivations is of course much broader, in which Professor Sen includes, participatory politics and capabilities, entitlements of a very important but a broader nature. I am only talking about acute sufferings in the present. I am not talking about realizing the human potential through education, through participatory democracy and freedoms and all that. These are very basic acute sufferings. That is why it needs a new word, and that's why I've used not deprivations but privations. Also, I must say that this UN has adopted this notion of deprivations and entitlements, and they are tracking it in the Human Development Index. But when you focus only on life expectancy or attendance in school, which is what the UN rankings are doing, you are missing out on something very important. Life expectancy improvement does not tell you that adult morbidity may be rising. And this is very, very clear in my field work. We are living longer, but we are living much worse. Especially adult, I'm not talking about only the aged having many ailments, but the middle-aged morbidity. And on this I did a survey, I'll show this. Yeah, this is the data. Unfortunately, in 1988, I had not done this survey about middle-aged morbidity. So I had this challenge of how to compare. What I did was, I asked each family, not each family, this is a sample of about 50 households. I asked in their present middle-aged members, the previous generation's middle-aged, and the previous to previous year's middle-aged, how many heart attacks were there, how many paralytic strokes were there, because these are incidents which families don't forget. Morbidity people can misreport. In fact, there is a puzzle about morbidity. Reported morbidity is much higher in more advanced countries. And within India, reported morbidity will be much higher in Kerala than in UP, Bihar, etc. Because poor generally don't see certain things as morbidity because they just don't have the choice to take sick leave or something. So this is universal. This is well known that morbidity which is reported is not a reliable criterion. It is always higher just as suicide rate is higher in can be more higher in advanced countries rather than poor. This is so in India also, despite this talk about farmer suicides and so on. Suicide rate is much higher in Kerala than in Bihar, in Tamil Nadu than in UP and so on. So we compared these three generations through very unforgettable incidents of heart attacks, paralytic strokes, and kidney failures. And there is clear rise over generations. So I think I have a very strong case to say that morbidity is rising this year, despite improvement in life expectancy, and thereby this Sanian view of human development needs to be corrected a bit on this front. We shall not. Similarly, about school attendance. School attendance doesn't tell you about learning outcomes. This Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan in my area is complete failure. Teacher salaries have gone up, constructed rooms have gone up, but even laborers are not sending their children to the government school. They send them to the school where the teacher is paid only 3,000 rupees as against 30,000 rupees paid to the government teacher, because the learning outcomes are much better. So this notion that just by tracking school attendance rather than learning outcomes you have indexed human development better requires a little rethink. I was talking about suicide rates. All India suicide rate is 11.5, Kerala 24, Tamil Nadu 23, Bihar 1.3, Uttar Pradesh 2.2. So, and in fact this is the old Durkheimian story. He had pointed out much, almost 100 years ago, that suicide goes up with development. Because suicide is a very complex, this notion that poverty leads to suicide. I'll give you data from Dhantala now. I tracked these 20 suicides in 20 years in the village. It's very difficult to assign a single reason. Most suicides have a complex set of reasons behind them if you look at case studies carefully. You can't just say that poverty led to this. There is often a depression preceding a suicide. This is a very puzzling act, and it should not be viewed from the rationalist economist mindset. Suicide is a very, very irrational act at some times, and reasons can be complex. But nevertheless, I tried to assign as per standard crime bureau practice what was the principal cause, probable principal cause, and indebtedness. You will see poverty, very few cases. On the other hand, maximum is exposed illicit relation in the village, because village views extramarital sex as something unpardonable. It's where if you are caught, now that has led to maximum number of suicides. Some of those could be murders, in fact, presented as suicides. Now I come to my last segment. How has the state responded?
Yeah.
Gender?
Suicide.
Yeah. In this chart, I haven't broken this, but yes, there were many women, and especially in these illicit relation cases, there were many women. Unfortunately, I haven't included this, but yes, you are right.
No,
that breakup should be there. It is there in my data, and there were many women.
I would be interested to know if it's an issue at all for the men, in fact.
Yeah, young men, there can be. There was, for example, I can cite, there was a young boy in illicit relation with his bhabhi, and the boy committed suicide. So those cases can be there, but yes, mostly it is women. And similarly, family disputes, and mostly it is women. Now, how has the state responded? I call this a Shukla-esque word. Shukla-esque is drawn from Srilal Shukla. Some of you may recall his famous novel Rag Darbari. Rag Darbari is, a very well-written novel about a Delhi University PhD student going to a village and what he sees in the village. It's a word of multiple overlapping schemes. Some of them are contradicting each other. In fact, I counted the number of schemes that were known to the BDO office next to Dhantala, Block Development Office, which is the center through which they are funded and implemented. And this is, I counted 69 schemes, of which 29 were just not even known to the villagers. 23 were known, 29 unknown include, there's a scheme for children of construction workers, their welfare. There is a Ujjwala scheme for rehabilitation. None of them are even known to the villagers. Then there are 23 schemes, this next set, second para, which are known to subjects, but they are inconsequential completely. They say that no benefit has come. Rajiv Awas Yojana. The slum dwellers were asked to fill up the forms. In fact, they were charged by the local Pradhan, because officially he could not charge, but he took 500 rupees for each family to get those forms filled. Nothing has come out of it. So these schemes are known, 23 of them, but no consequence on the ground. Then there are 11 schemes of which there is some impact. These include midday meals. The impact is there, but they are not much valued by people. In fact, some families still give their own tiffin to the students. They don't rely on the school meal. Similarly, Anganwadi, I have seen, the food that comes, Anganwadi, you must be aware, is a creche service provided under the ICDS, Integrated Child Development Scheme, since 1970s. Sometimes this food is just thrown away. There are no takers. So I think a lot of rethink is required on the way we design schemes. And what are the schemes which have a substantial impact? 3 sets. One is, of course, the PDS system. This is a huge help. 2 rupee wheat and 3 rupee rice, and I think it is about 9-10 rupees sugar, plus the cylinder, which they save about 150 rupees on the subsidized cylinder. Earlier they were getting kerosene, now they get cylinder. This saves about 1200 rupees for each family. If they were to take these things from the market, they will spend about, I counted, 1200 rupees more. Now this is a huge help for those who are near or below the poverty line. So this is a help. But let's remember, Government of India is today spending about 1% of GDP on the PDS system. That is 1 lakh crore. In the expanded PDS system, 1 lakh crore is being spent. As Panagaria wrote in Indian Express recently, 50% of this does not reach the village. They are purchased by FCI. There is huge wastage in transit. Plus there is, of course, corruption. And 23% is administrative charges for the scheme in this 1 lakh crore. So only about 25% is actually getting distributed. So when I come to my policy prescription, one is the voucher alternative. Why can't the government just give food vouchers instead of first procuring food grains from the village, taking it to FCI godown, then sending it back to ration shops? And this huge both leakage as well as corruption and wastage on way. So just food vouchers which can be used only on food and food of their choice. Somebody could be having wheat. Why do you have to force them to purchase wheat if they want to make use of the subsidized price? So let them go to the grocery shops, and the grocery shops can then send those vouchers and get the help that the state is ready to provide on this front now. Apart from PDS, a very important help on the ground is ASHA. The vaccination program has definitely worked and helped. Although they don't go into family planning or distributing condoms, etc. But vaccination, these ASHA workers are present on the ground, and they have done a wonderful delivery on that. And that is reflected in the infant mortality and maternal mortality rate, which have definitely come down. I think to about 50 is the IMR, and 200 per lakh is the MMR rate, which is a huge improvement, although not enough if you go by the international standards, which will be 1 or 2 in Germany, 50 still in India. There are some schemes on which the government doesn't spend anything, but for example, the Domestic Violence Prohibition Act and so on, which are a help on the ground, although they are just enabling acts. Now, apart from the way these schemes are visible and working on the ground, they can also be classified by the nature of their aims. So anti-poverty programs, special groups assistance like assistance for women, for children and so on, that can be another classification. Then you can include, by aims, other programs which are, self-employment generation help. For example, you had Shahri Swarozgar Yojana, Gram Swarozgar Yojana, etc. And of course, health and education. And now, what are the glaring gaps in this welfare architecture? As I said, not even a dispensary in either Aradhak Nagar or Dhantala yet. And they do visit hospitals in adjoining kasbas and cities, but waiting time for a doctor, just seeing the doctor, is up to 2 hours. Even some of the poor don't think of going to the public facilities. They prefer a private doctor for this delay especially. Secondly, there is this threat of fake medicines and now fake doctors. You know this Vyapam scam. We should have been more alert even earlier. This is a huge worry. You have not only doctors purchasing seats in MBBS colleges, but having others taking their exam. The immense threat they pose, and this has been happening for years. And we are not tracking this. That's why I said we need district level monitoring centers for all these threats that are growing to public safety and public and health, etc. Another major glaring gap is decent minimum wage. The minimum wage is still about 300 rupees in UP, I think 400 rupees in Delhi, which are really, I think, extremely even unfortunate to talk about. 300 in dollar terms would be half a dollar per hour or so. 600 rupees will make $10, so $5 for the day. I was calculating that in a day a laborer earns about 5,000-6,000 rupees in the minimum US wage. That is the salary that one laborer gets or a worker gets in a month in India. This is the huge gap. So this is another, in our welfare architecture and neglect. And of course, apart from health, insurance for old age, insurance for disability. Now they have introduced post-liberalization because the state had more revenue. We have small pensions of 1,000 rupees or 1,500 rupees in Delhi. And in UP it is just 300 rupees. This year the Samajwadi pension has come. They have announced that they will increase. It has not been implemented yet. Also, I wanted to report the total number of pensions being given, widows, disabled and old, in Dhantala is just 15 in a population of 2,700. And it is entirely at the pleasure of the Pradhan. In Aradhak Nagar it is slightly better, 50 pensions, 50 in a population of 1,700. But still there are many more that are required and they are misallocated very often. Similarly, BPL cards, there are 140 BPL cards now in Aradhak Nagar, which is not a very bad picture in 290 total families. But in Dhantala, only 25 BPL cards in a structure of 430 households. When poverty is much more in Dhantala, population is bigger, just 25 BPL cards. If there is a little time, I will talk about the architecture of the local state. We have, 2 tiers of, dispersal of welfare. One is the bureaucracy and the other is the elected representatives. The bureaucracy starts with the village secretary. Above him is the block development office, which has a BDO and 3-4 ADOs, assistant development officers. And above them, of course, is the district magistrate and the collector. This is the block development office gate, and on top, because I could not take the photograph on a working day, so on and off day, 26th January, we took this photograph.
Nice building.
Yeah.